When they played together, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant had, at the time, the best offensive rating in NBA history. But due to injuries, controversy, and drama, they only played together for 16 games.
Is this the biggest failure in NBA history?
We didn't think we could beat the Nets at full power. That was a team that we thought we might not be able to get past for 3 or 4 years.
This is the story of the Brooklyn Nets' Big Three, arguably the biggest super team failure in NBA history. To understand how the Nets were even able to pull this off and acquire their superstars, we need to look back to 2010, when a Russian billionaire bought the franchise and created a super team, which soon became a disaster. In the span of 3 years, Mikhail Prokhorov and the Nets' general manager Billy King quickly sold out all of Brooklyn's future draft picks, which later turned into Damian Lillard, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum. And all they got for it was a declining Deron Williams, Joe Johnson's overpriced contract, and the ancient Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, whose combined age was over 100 years old.
I think we've got pieces now that we can compete for a championship, and that's our goal.
With a team full of old stars, all the Nets managed was a 2014 second-round playoff loss to the Heat.
You know, it didn't work out, and that's what everybody looks at, but I easily feel like it could have worked out just the same.
Soon, all their superstars left the team, and the Nets were stuck in the mud with a bad roster, 0 draft picks, and no ability to sign free agents.
Let's not forget that this Nets team was assembled to win now, but according to Jason Kidd, it's not quite that simple. Both him and Billy King have a lot to think about now in the offseason, which begins now.
But then, in February of 2016, Billy King finally got fired, and in his place came Sean Marks, a former player who won a 2005 NBA title with the Spurs, where he learned a thing or two about building a championship roster. Marks didn't have a lot of room to maneuver to acquire players, but what he had, he used brilliantly. Brooklyn became the NBA junkyard because they accepted anybody whom the league didn't want, like the basketball version of Moneyball.
If we win with this team, we'll change the game.
The Nets GM performed a miracle in less than 3 years on the job, collecting a ton of young assets like Jarrett Allen, Joe Harris, Spencer Dinwiddie, and D'Angelo Russell, who became an all-star. Out of nowhere, the Nets made the 2019 playoffs, and then Marks decided to cash in. After the 2019 finals, Kevin Durant became available, and despite his torn Achilles, he was just too good to pass on, especially because he came in a package deal with his good friend and the best ball handler of all time, Kyrie Irving. So, Marks shipped D'Angelo Russell in a sign-and-trade deal for Durant, which was another small miracle, and the only way to create cap space for both Durant and Kyrie. And despite KD missing the entire year, and Kyrie only playing 20 games due to a shoulder injury, the Nets miraculously still made the 2020 playoffs. Even though they got swept by the Raptors, Brooklyn had plenty to be happy about, because they were finally going to unwrap the best gift in basketball, a healthy Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Before the 2021 season, the Nets were the betting favorite to win the Larry O'Brien Trophy. Steve Nash became the new head coach, which was a debatable move, considering his lack of coaching experience and the success of his predecessor, Jacques Vaughn. But the Nets had so much talent that it almost didn't matter. However, Irving's injury at the beginning of the season showcased a lack of playmaking on the team, especially because the other point guard, Spencer Dinwiddie, tore his ACL after 3 games. So, Marks decided to do what Billy King did 8 years earlier. He made another big move, pushing all his chips to the middle of the table and going all in. The Nets traded for James Harden, but they paid a hefty price. The Beard cost Brooklyn 3 first-round picks, 4 pick swaps, Karis LeVert, Jarrett Allen, Taurean Prince, and Rodions Kurucs. And while Harden's trade cleared out all the depth the Nets had carefully collected for years, it's hard to say it wasn't the right move. Harden was 31 years old at the time and had been one of the 5 best players in the league for the last 5 years. With Harden on board, the Nets could constantly play with at least one superstar on the floor and were absolutely unstoppable when all 3 played together.
Oh, Blake Griffin! Razzle dazzle! Oh, next level! Kevin Durant!
With their big 3 on the floor, they were literally the greatest offense in NBA history, scoring 120 points per 100 possessions. The Nets seemed destined to ride through Brooklyn on a big bus in June, smoking cigars, drinking, and passing around the Larry O'Brien Trophy. However, injuries to all 3 stars limited their time on the court, and their big 3 played just 8 games together in the regular season. The Nets still finished second in the East, and when the playoffs started, the big 3 was finally healthy and extremely dangerous. In the first round of the playoffs against the Celtics, the superstar trio of KD, Harden, and Kyrie averaged 85 points per game, the most points by a trio in any playoff series in NBA history. the Nets steamrolled past Boston in 5 games, averaging an absurd 124 points in the series. But then against the Bucks in the second round, Brooklyn had tons of bad luck. After 43 seconds of the first game, Harden pulled a hamstring, which forced him to miss 4 games. And when he returned, he was clearly hobbled. But even without James, Kyrie and KD were still capable of winning on their own, as the Nets led the series 2-1 after 3 games. And then in Game 4, Irving sprained his ankle on Giannis's foot and was ruled out for the series. But thanks to KD's heroics and his unreal 49 points, 17 rebounds, and 10 assists triple-double, the Nets won Game 5. The Bucks countered in Game 6, but in Game 7, KD was playing out of his mind again, and Brooklyn had the final possession and a chance to win the game. Durant took a 3-pointer that would give the Nets a series win, and it looked like they did win after KD's buzzer beater went in.
He turns, he shoots, yes! With 1 second remaining!
But because KD barely stepped on the line, his shot was just a 2-pointer, and the game went into overtime. In the OT, KD and the Nets were running on fumes, and they lost the game and the series. Still, despite the loss, it was clear that the Nets were on the right track. They just needed to get healthy.
So, we get ready for next year.
When the 21-22 season started, in the NBA's traditional GM survey, 72% of general managers said that Brooklyn would win the title, and KD was the leading vote-getter for MVP. When their big 3 was healthy, Coach Nash established a deadly 5-out system where all 5 players could dribble, pass, and shoot, with clear roles on the team. Harden made the biggest sacrifice in usage, taking on the role of a pure point guard, with the second-best assist numbers in the league. This allowed Irving and Durant to remain in their standard roles as scorers. The Nets moved the ball really well, with only 10% of their offense ending in isolations, and 62% of their points were assisted. With all this firepower, Steve Nash looked like a damn good coach. But then the drama started. Kyrie Irving's stance on the pandemic and the mandatory vaccine meant he couldn't play games in New York. But despite Irving's status, a bunch of other injuries to the roster, and a bottom 10 defense, the Nets were still more talented than everybody, comfortably holding a top 3 place in the East. And then, more drama. This time it wasn't Kyrie, but James Harden, who couldn't come to terms that Irving was not willing to sacrifice for the better of the team and take the vaccine. James lost trust in the franchise and their ability to hold everybody accountable, so he publicly asked for a trade. On February 7th, New York lifted the vaccine mandate for municipal workers, meaning that Kyrie would finally be able to play in all games starting in late March. But the damage to the team's chemistry was irreversible, and even with Kyrie now able to play in the playoffs, James Harden was still determined to play elsewhere. And 3 days later, and just 1 year after they paid a king's ransom for his services, the Nets were forced to trade Harden to Philadelphia in exchange for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and 2 first-round picks.
Playoffs right around the corner, so we got to fast track into getting used to each other. But I'm excited. I think everybody got what they wanted.
It all seemed like a reasonably fair trade at the time, because Simmons was a former All-Star and the all-defensive stopper that the Nets desperately needed. But that turned out to be the furthest thing from the truth. Even though Harden was still nursing a hamstring injury and wasn't at full strength, he still suited up and played in games, which couldn't be said for Simmons, who became the next big fiasco of the Nets' 2022 season. Towards the end of the year, Simmons was ready to play, and then he wasn't. He even told the team that he would play in the playoffs, and then decided not to play at all, in one of the most bizarre seesaw decision-making processes in NBA history. After all that drama, the Nets somehow made the playoffs as the 7th seed. In Game 1 of the first round against the Celtics, Kyrie led a miraculous comeback that gave the Nets the lead in the final seconds. But the Celtics were a resilient bunch, and on the last play of the game, Tatum was left all alone under the basket for a buzzer-beating layup. In the rest of the series, the Nets came close, but they could never get in front. Steve Nash could either deploy a lineup with shooters and no defense, or a better defensive unit that had bad spacing offensively. Durant was tormented by the Celtics defenders, who all took turns guarding him and tiring him out. And the result was a sweep. A 4-0 loss was a slap in the face, and a big wake-up call for the team everybody believed was going to win the championship.
This was a season that had so much promise. One of the preseason favorites to start the year, the Brooklyn Nets, and it all fell apart at multiple iterations during the season.
Well, it's a disappointment. They lost in the first round of the playoffs. They didn't lose in the second round of the conference finals.
Got swept in the first round.
They got swept, so that means things are not good.
But before the dust settled, the Nets became a hot topic again. But this time it wasn't Kyrie, but Kevin Durant.
Kevin Durant has requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets.
Durant then went a step further and demanded from the owner that he either fired coach Steve Nash and GM Sean Marks or let him go. It was arguably the most aggressive trade demand by any player in NBA history.
Kevin Durant, I'm sad for you, bro. You all alone. You have no help. And more importantly than anything else, you made the wrong decision by going to Brooklyn.
Thankfully, owner Joe Tsai held his ground, refused KD's ultimatum, and didn't succumb to the pressure to trade him. Against all odds, both Kyrie and KD started the 2023 season for the Nets, and they were joined by Ben Simmons, who finally made his debut for the team. But when the season started, the Nets were an abomination. With a defense that couldn't stop some college teams, the Nets started the season with 6 losses in 8 games. Simmons looked like a shell of his former self, and the Nets couldn't defend nor rebound. And even though Kevin Durant averaged over 30 points per game, the Nets' offense was still barely average. After such a horrible start to the season, the Nets fired Steve Nash, who clearly lost the locker room and the players' trust. However, on-court problems were soon overshadowed by another off-court controversy, again produced by Kyrie Irving. Kyrie tweeted an anti-Semitic message due to a documentary he watched and refused to apologize for it. So the Nets suspended him for 8 games, and it seemed like the team would sink even further in the standings. But somehow they didn't.
For the last 2 weeks, the Brooklyn Nets have been in the middle of a firestorm of controversy.
Well, today they hired a new head coach. They chose a candidate who checks a lot of boxes.
Under Jacques Vaughn, who returned as the head coach, Brooklyn started winning games. And at the midpoint of the season, they had a 27-14 record, 1 win shy of the best record in the conference. But this team couldn't last more than a month without some kind of scandal. And of course, it was Kyrie Irving again. Kyrie was in the last year of his contract, and even though he was still a top NBA talent on the court, he presented a huge risk for any team brave enough to sign him. At that point, he was a loose cannon, and you just didn't know what he was going to say next that could sideline him from the court indefinitely. Sean Marks had had enough of his antics, and he refused to give Kyrie the long-term extension he desired. So Kyrie asked for a trade before the deadline, and the Nets agreed to trade him, because if they didn't, Kyrie would leave the team for free the following summer. On February 6, 2023, the Nets traded Irving and Markieff Morris to the Dallas Mavericks in exchange for Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie, an unprotected 2029 first-round pick, and 2 second-round picks.
Brooklyn Nets GM Sean Marks is working with Kevin Durant and his business manager Rich Kleiman on finding a trade for the franchise star. Apparently Durant requested a trade from the Nets.
And on February 9th, Durant was gone too. KD was traded to the Suns, along with TJ Warren, in exchange for Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Jay Crowder, 4 unprotected first-round picks, and a 2028 first-round pick swap.
It was a lot of ups and downs, but I loved the grind. Everybody in Brooklyn loved the grind too, so I built a family over there. They're going to always be a part of my journey. We didn't accomplish what we wanted to accomplish as far as winning the championship, just like I told him, but I enjoy the grind. And everybody there, we tried our hardest every day, regardless of what was going on in the media, what was going on with our teammates.
And just like that, the Nets super team was done and dusted. In the 4 years on the team, Kyrie Irving played just 143 games, about 40% of all possible games. Durant played 129 games for Brooklyn, and Harden just 80. They won only 1 playoff series together, just like the 2014 Nets super team. But at least this time, they had a bunch of draft picks after all the superstars were gone. Thank you for watching. And if you like this one, subscribe to Nonstop and check out some of our other videos.